taking on any more students, and literally it will just be final. As that I said, I do it for a year. I've been preaching mentoring for the last 3 years since I started this page. I gave people the opportunity to get mentored by myself for the last year. We've seen some amazing success with the students, but you will have only around 2 to 3 months left to actually gain access. So I just wanted to mention that for anyone that is interested. So on that note, let's get into this evening's webinar. So if you haven't guessed already, this evening's webinar is about over trading, how to overcome it, the triggers that are involved in over trading. So how can we really spot these triggers? How can we dig deep into this negative pattern of behavior that is taking place, that is basically not only causing us to make stupid mistakes, mistakes that we probably shouldn't be making at the level that you're at. Yes, this webinar will be on YouTube. It's all recorded. But like I was saying, we're probably making mistakes that we shouldn't be at this level. And when it comes to over trading, usually the problem isn't that hard to spot. The problem is people don't know how to spot the exact problem itself and put a pinpoint to it. And the reality is it's not, it's not good enough to just be aware that you are over trading, because that doesn't solve the problem. We often hear from different psychological or performance coaches or things like this, and they say that you have to be aware of your emotions. You have to be aware of how you're feeling. But really, that's bullshit, because awareness is just the first part. We actually have to map out the pattern. And if you've read any of Jared Tendler's books, a great performance coach for golfers, poker players, and traders, he talks about mapping out the problem, okay? So basically, I'm going to bring you not through his process. You can find his stuff in his books, but I would highly recommend reading or watching any of his material. So let's just get straight into it, okay? So the topic of overtrading, how to overcome it. Now, what we need to realize is that, let me just get rid of this here. I'll just move these things here. Okay. So what we need to realize when it comes to patterns of behavior, there's a specific process that takes place over and over again. A lot of people don't realize the process that is taking place, or they're not even aware of the initial triggers. So what happens is that a lot of people will tend to overtrade, and it's only when they've actually taken on that negative impact from a series of losses, maybe even a blown account if it's gone that far, that they've realized that they've overtraded in the first place. So what we're trying to find out this evening is, what is that initial trigger that's causing the overtrading, and then we're going to find a solution to basically deflect from that negative behavior, okay? But that starts with finding the pinpoint problem of what is taking place. So this is how any pattern really of behavior takes place. It starts off with a feeling. You're feeling a certain way, and then it starts off with the behavior itself. So you start doing something. Sometimes it could be an act. So if let's say, for example, if you're nervous, the feelings will be nervous, anxiety. The behavior might be sweating of your hands. It may be shaking of the legs. So, we get a little bit anxious. And, then your beliefs may be these limiting beliefs, etc. And then thoughts move on forward as well. Okay, but we're going to stick to overtrading for this example in this webinar. But one thing that we see across multiple traders that I have personally worked with is that there is always a pretty common trigger amongst the majority. Now, unless you have really, really, traumatic psychological problems, you'll probably find that the problems you're facing from a psychological point of view are pretty common amongst the majority of traders, full stop. And this is why when you actually understand this simple process, you'll start seeing it with a lot of your other psychological problems that you're having, and you'll start to be able to map out what is actually happening. Okay, so let's just dig into a few examples of this. So we have feeling, behavior, beliefs, and thought. This is how the patterns take place. Now, if we look at an example of over trading, basically the original feeling is I want to take a trade. Okay, pretty simple. Yes. Then the behavior is usually we start just blindlessly scrolling through the chart. So let's start from the initial trigger point. So you may have taken a trade already. It may have been a winner, it may have been a loss, but all of a sudden you have this feeling that you either weren't satisfied because it didn't meet your expectations, or you just feel like I feel like trading more today. I'm bored, I'm more time, whatever it may be, but you want to take a trade. You have this initial feeling to take a trade. So what happens? If you have a plan, you start looking through the chart to see, is there anything lining up in my trading plan? But then what happens? We kind of slowly start falling off slightly. And this is sometimes due to the fact that maybe there's no setup there that's lining up with our rules. So now we have this initial feeling where we have this desire that we want to trade, but we don't have anything that's actually satisfying our expectations of taking a trade now in the first place. So what happens is we start blindly scrolling through the charts. And you've probably all done this. You've probably sat there flicking through your watch list, going through one by one by one by one, looking for some sort of opportunity, even sometimes second glancing or looking at it a third time at the same pair that you've already carried out your analysis on, just trying to find something that will give you some sort of belief that there is a trading opportunity there. And this is what happens next. You eventually find some sort of setup that lines up with your beliefs. So you believe you have found an ideal trading setup. You've almost fallen into this trap and convinced yourself that this is a setup because you've had such a strong desire to trade. And then the initial thought then after this is you take the trade, and the initial trade idea, then the setup fails, and you realize that you shouldn't have taken the trade, and this causes emotional tilt, and then we just go off on a complete emotional roller coaster, consistently over trading for the rest of the weekday, depending on how traumatic that experience was. So what we need to do is we need to find the initial trigger. Okay, so the initial trigger is something that allows us to spot what is happening. It's almost like a signal that, okay, I've realized what is happening here. This is what is next. And in order to do that, we have to become very aware of this process. What's happening? What's the initial feeling? What is the behavior that takes place after I feel it? What is the belief I have and the thought process that happens after that? Because once we're able to map it out, we can see that, okay, this is where it's starting. This is either the act or thought that will allow me to basically write this down in my journal, write it down in my trading plan that, hey, this is an initial trigger. When I start blindlessly scrolling through the chart, if I'm self-aware enough and working in a flow state, I'll realize that usually that is the signal that I'm about to start taking trades that are completely out of my plan, or I'm falling into that trap of over trading completely. So our trigger in this case is scrolling through the charts, because you could say it's the feeling of wanting to take a trade, but a lot of the time we're not going to be aware enough to even spot that, because when we arrive at the desk on a day-to-day basis, we want to take a trade because we're there at the desk anyway. So in my opinion, the initial feeling of wanting to take a trade is probably not a strong enough signal. But just for this example, I think a very strong signal is this blindlessly scrolling through the charts, being very self-aware that you're looking for movement instead of statistical opportunity that really makes sense, opportunity that has edge. There's no point of, convincing ourselves that, okay, I will recognize the difference between this thought and this thought. It's actually a lot easier that if we can assign it to some sort of action, just like being nervous or anxious. The initial action is we're, shaking our leg, or our palms of our hands are sweating. If we're tired and we're not working within our flow state, the initial action could be as simple as we start rubbing our eyes. We're not awake, we're slumping in our seat. Sometimes the initial reactions are going to be so small, but the outcome that where the road that we're going down could have such a negative impact. And this is why the trading psychology side of things can be so difficult for some individuals to really piece together, because first of all, they don't understand the process that is happening. They're not really able to pinpoint the trigger, and therefore when they are aware of it, they're almost in the act, or they've placed the trade and now they have to exit that, a small loss. But that's not good enough. We want to solve the solution. We want to deflect from the total idea or pattern of behavior that is overtrading. So in this case, we found our behavioral pattern, and that is we're scrolling through the charts. So this is our next basically initial. Let me just move this here. Can everyone see this perfectly on the screen? I just want to make sure here that everybody can see this. If you can just message into the chat before we continue any further. I just want to double check. Yes, okay, perfect. So when it comes to now that we've spot the initial trigger, and we'll talk about examples of this as well, because I will be doing more webinars like this where we can dig a lot deeper into the subject of, mapping out the behavior, spotting it, and because although the behaviors are similar, they're going to be personal depending on your traumatic experiences as you've grown up. What is that scar tissue that was left from maybe previous blown accounts? Or things like this, okay? So we found our behavior, we found the initial trigger. That is our signal. So you would write that down. You'd mapped out your behavior. You said, okay, this is something I can use as a signal that I can basically see taking place in my patterns of behavior that will initially stop me then from overtrading. And this is how it works out. We want to then basically deflect from what the original result was. So the original result was, let's just to kind of clarify things here, it was that you had a feeling, initial thought that you wanted to trade. That's nothing really out of the normal. The next part was that you couldn't find an initial setup, so you start blindlessly scrolling through the charts. Then usually what happens next is that you have belief, or you convince yourself that, yeah, this is a trading opportunity because you've such a strong desire to trade. And then the thoughts after that are that, you fucked up and you made a mistake, etc., etc. So what we want to do is we want to map out a new behavior. But in order to do that, it's like, Atomic Habits, if you've read it, we want to basically break that pattern of behavior and replace it with a different result, or find the cue and then replace it with a different result. So in this case, we're taking the feeling, we've initial thought to trade, our behavior is scrolling through the chart, and then we want to deflect that by either basically just completely disrupting the pattern of behavior. So we sometimes almost fall into a habit of doing the same thing over and over again. And really, this is like an act of self-sabotage. If we're not constantly improving ourselves or trying to work on that problem, and even Jared Teldler himself says that, if you haven't found the problem or the solution to the problem in around 2 weeks, it's probably a very, very deep psychological problem that you're going to need a lot of inner work done on, basically. So when it comes to these patterns of behaviors, we can't find that deep inner work until we map out the entire process. And that involves then mapping out the process, putting in a disruptor of that pattern, and then deflecting that into something else. So this is what it would look like for an example. Sorry, and I know we went off track there a little bit. I lost my thoughts, but we're back on track now, okay? So the initial feeling, I want to take a trade. The behavior, I scroll through the charts. And now what we're doing is we're deflecting. Now that we're actually aware of where the trigger lies in the pattern or the process of our behavior, we're able to now deflect from the next outcome, which is the negative part of overtrading itself, by actually deflecting the pattern of behavior. So in this case, you walk away from the chart. It could be as simple as that. If you're able to spot the trigger, that is the hardest part. And then it's really just finding something that holds enough weight for yourself to stick to the basically the deflection in this case, where we actually, right, here is the impulse we're moving toward, or this is the initial trigger. Instead of heading to the next step, we're going to deflect from this pattern by closing off the chart. So for example, last week I found myself, this will just give a kind of easy breakdown. Last week I was trading euro dollar. I was looking for a just short-term long opportunity on the 15-minute chart. And I took my trade, managed to get around 1% out of it. And I felt really, I wasn't actually satisfied with the results. I actually expected euro dollar to to move a little bit further that day, according to my statistics, according to the way it was lining up. And it just didn't satisfy my expectations. And slowly, I found myself immediately, literally almost immediately, heading to the charts or looking to my watch list and scrolling through it. Even though before that opportunity, I originally decided that this was the only pair that I was going to trade today. I said, oh, I didn't really get what I wanted out of that. I fell into that trap of blindlessly scrolling through my watch list. But because I was self-aware enough, I stopped myself from looking at trading movement rather than opportunity that had statistical edge. Because I've said this plenty of times, if you're over trading, really, in my opinion, it's a trap that we can all make mistakes, okay? But in my opinion, you're not really realizing what the job of a trader is. We hear it all the time, all the time. The job of a trader is to manage risk. The job of a trader is to work with statistics, or the job of a trader is to read fundamentals or make good decisions, or whatever other bullshit that people want to say to sound smart. But the job of a trader is to perform. When you summarize that, when you categorize it all and bring it together, it all comes down to performance. This is the performance field. So if you're over trading, I think sometimes people don't realize that you actually don't truly understand how much of a performance field this is, because you would only be making the best trading decisions that you possibly can. And once you're done, you're done. And you constantly need to remind yourself of the larger picture that, okay, this trade makes sense. And a simple way of doing this is coming to your trading desk at the beginning of the day, writing down exactly what you want to see, where you want to see it, when you want it to take place, what you want to see to enter, what you want to see to exit, how you're going to manage that trade, all the areas of friction that trade may come into contact with, and how you will manage each area of friction if you start seeing that trade possibly coiling against you or something like this. And if you can stick to that exact setup every single day, you are more likely to come out on top at the end of the month rather than blindlessly just committing to one trade and then just going based off how you feel. Because a lot of people who are over trading are going based off how they feel. They're not realizing that if you're basing your emotions off how you feel, and you don't feel the way you felt, you don't feel the same as you did today, as you did yesterday, the day before, and the day before that, that inconsistency of how you feel is going to show up in how inconsistent your results are, because you're basing it off how you feel. And that's why we need to constantly remind ourselves that it's a performance field. And in order to perform, we have to follow the plan. And that means that we can't convince ourselves that we're smarter than the original plan that we developed for ourselves. The one that we can look at our spreadsheet and basically see over and over again, and constantly remind ourselves the larger picture of how this is going to play out over time, as long as we're able to execute to the best of our ability. So let's just get back to over trading here. I know we went off topic there a little bit, but it's all relevant. So like I was saying, when it comes to over trading, we have the initial feeling, I want to take a trade. And then we have the behavior. We're scrolling through the charts. That is your initial trigger. And then you want to put something in there between the next step, which is the act of over trading. You want to put something between the trigger and the self-destruction act, or this negative act of behavior, which is over trading, to deflect from it. That could be closing your charts. That could be going outside for a walk. It could be absolutely anything. It could be as simple as taking a deep breath. What matters is that we're breaking that pattern of behavior. We're breaking the process. We're disrupting it. And that's what's helping us find that, or break that negative pattern of behavior. So one more time, just to explain this for the people that have come on here. You have the initial feeling that you want to take a trade. The behavior that happens next, so when we're starting to lead to that process of over trading, is that you start blindlessly scrolling through the chart. You may have taken a trade setup already. You may not have taken a trade already. Or maybe there's something that's just, you're not seeing a setup there for yourself, but you have this initial thought that you want to trade, this desire that you need to pull the trigger today. That when you notice that you're scrolling through the charts and you blindly see yourself looking for movement instead of opportunity that has statistical edge, that is your trigger point. And from there, that is where you deflect. And we're just painting out a new roadmap of how this pattern of behavior is going to take place. We're not necessarily saying that this is going to stop our initial reaction of how we feel. Even as we deflect from that pattern of behavior, I could walk outside and get a cup of coffee and leave the office here. Like I did that day when I was sharing about euro dollar. I can do that. I can walk out. But that didn't stop the initial reaction that I felt like, wanted a bit more out of that euro dollar trade today. But what we're doing is we're breaking the pattern of behavior to at least deflect from us possibly making a mistake. We're stacking the odds in our favor by actually deflecting from that negative pattern of behavior. So let's just get into this a little bit more, okay? Because it even goes deeper than this when it comes to the thought process or anything like this, okay? So a lot of people, you may have heard about the default mode from the book, The One Thing, okay? And it's about willpower and thinking power. And you may be familiar with mental capital overall, okay? So I want to just briefly talk about the cause of impulsive behavior because I think it falls in line with overtrading. Initially these decisions we make when we overtrade, it's like this impulsive behavior that's taking place. We almost don't have control of it sometimes until we see the negative effect of it. And by that time, it's too late. So first of all, before actually we move on, is everyone understanding everything that we've spoke about so far? Is there any questions about that? I know I mentioned it multiple times, but you never know. I've went over it multiple times. Just want to make sure everyone understands. There's no questions. Let's give it a minute. Right, okay, I don't think there's any questions. Right, so if everyone understands, we'll move on to the default mode. Okay, so the cause of impulsive behavior. Sorry here, Kirky. I can relate with the same thing you just told happens to me so many times. Yes, and that's what we'll find. Well, you'll see that the more traders I've worked with myself, you'll see that the patterns of behavior that they experience on a day-to-day basis, it's pretty similar across the large majority. Like I said, some people will have specific problems that are very, very specific and personal to them. From any maybe trauma of how they were brought up, and that kind of linked into maybe how they want to control things, leading to self-sabotaging themselves, giving them a false illusion of control, all these different things, which is a little bit more personal. But these kind of usual things of overtrading, the initial trigger seems to be pretty similar across the large majority. So how to stop boring trading, like trading because of boredom. Okay, so this is actually interesting. Now, I can't remember. Actually, give me 2 seconds here. I'm just going to look up the exact name of this, just so you can actually look into researching this yourself. Okay, so 1 second. Here, I'm going to explain exactly why we actually do this from, I suppose, more of a scientific point of view. So basically, if you look up, there's a graph, Yerkes-Dodson law. So I'm just going to type that into the chat here. Some of you may be aware of this, but this is the best way I can explain it. Okay, Yerkes-Dodson law. So it's in the chat there at the moment. So you can do your own research into that, later after the webinar. But basically what it's stating is that we have optimal levels where we perform, at our peak performance, okay? And that means that to achieve our peak performance, we actually have to have an optimal level of arousal and stress. So this basically, your prefrontal cortex, okay, in the front of your brain here is in charge of your decision making. But in order for that to reach its peak performance, to make the best decisions, it needs almost a perfect balance of neurochemicals. Not too much and not too little, for it to allow you to actually access that peak performance. And in most simplest terms, that means having not too much dopamine and not too little dopamine. So it's like initial boredom. Too little dopamine, you don't do anything. Too much dopamine, you're going to make the wrong decisions anyway. You feel too much stress, etc., etc. So oh, excuse me, it looks like this meeting is actually going to end. Shit, I'm not in the correct account. We may actually have to pause this, and I will have to start this again. Apologies about this. It just said that there's about 10 minutes until this meeting finishes, so I need to sign into my actual other account. So give me a few minutes and we will start this webinar from where we're at, okay? Apologies about this. We'll be back literally about 5 minutes. Again. And we are back in action. So everyone can see the screen in front of them as well. Default mode, it should say, the cause of impulsive behavior. We can all see that, I suppose, just to make sure before we jump straight in. Just even send a thumbs up or something like that into the chat if you can. Right, I'm just going to presume. Right. Okay, perfect. So just to kind of cover what we just talked about one more time. So for those who missed out on this here. So initially, we're talking about the patterns of behavior that cause overtrading. So just going to do a very quick summary. So in order to find out what is causing or how we can actually stop that negative behavior, we have to map out how it takes place in the first place. So that means actually mapping out the process of how the initial behavior of overtrading takes place. So for example, usually what happens is we have the initial feeling that we want to take a trade. Usually the behavior that takes place is we may find ourselves blindlessly scrolling through the charts and just looking for movement rather than opportunity that has statistical edge. And we then fully convince ourselves that we found an opportunity that makes sense, probably based off momentum, or just convincing ourselves that has some technical confluence there that has weight to it. And from there, then we have a thought, after the initial overtrading takes place, that you shouldn't have taken the trade, which causes you to go on emotional tilt, etc., etc. Okay, and we were saying that we wanted to find that initial trigger, which starts at that behavior. So something I personally like to use an act. So like I said before, if you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed or nervous about the trade, you can see that in the sweating of the palm of your hands. You can see it maybe because you're shaking your leg up and down, or you're kind of uncomfortable, or your shoulders are really tight. That's something that we can actually measure if you're self-aware enough of it in the first place. Or something even that you're tired. So when we're tired, from a psychological point of view, we actually tend to seek riskier opportunities or riskier setups. So initial trigger could be something as simple as, instead of looking for the actual act of maybe rubbing your eye, maybe that's something that's not a strong enough trigger for you. You could just result into actually tracking your sleep. If I don't get an optimal level of 7 to 8 hours of sleep, you could initially maybe lower your risk that day, or maybe not trade at all. And that's something that I've actually been doing this year, and I found that it's hugely benefited me. I've become quite obsessed with the data that I'm tracking on my sleep. And funny enough, I'm seeing a very positive correlation between my negative days and, some of my best days of this year have all been directly linked to, how well I slept that night, which I find really interesting. And if you look up some studies online, you can actually, find out a lot of studies on traders specifically that have been done and their performance based on how well they slept. Okay, so like I said, we found the behavior, we found the initial trigger. Okay, so and then we wanted to deflect and break and disrupt that pattern of behavior by adding in and make some sort of act, so walking away from the charts, etc. Okay, so we've already covered this. So I want to talk about the default mode here, the cause of impulsive behavior. If you want to look into more detail about this, there's a full chapter on this in the book called The One Thing. I believe it's by Gary Keller, but don't quote me on that. But I've read it about 3 times this year. It's an absolutely brilliant book. My whole book is just completely highlighted. And if you would actually like to see some of the notes I've taken on that book, I can send that into the Telegram chat. So if you want to see that, you can just message me in the chat there and I'll send it in if there's actually people who want to see those notes, okay? But initially, what is the default mode in trading, okay? And I think it's linked to overtrading, okay? So we've all had these thoughts, we fucked up, and we kind of say to ourselves, that wasn't me. I don't even understand why I took that step. That's completely out of character. Why would I do such a thing? And we've all had these thoughts where we know that we should be following our plan, but we don't follow our plan. And then we get mad at ourselves for not following our plan. And then we actually just experience this crazy emotional roller coaster then, and because of how pissed off we are at ourselves and the lack of discipline we had. But I think it's a little bit deeper than just discipline. I think it comes down to a lot about mental capital. Okay, so what we need to understand is that the more willpower we assign to a certain task. Now, this information is not my own. Okay, so I've made this relevant to trading. But Gary Keller in his book would say that when it comes to willpower, it's like a muscle. Okay, so it can only be used so much until it needs to recover. It's like when we do reps. Your initial first rep in the gym is strong, and your form is good, but the more reps you do and the longer you actually are using this specific muscle you're training, let it be your biceps, triceps, whatever, your reps become a little bit more sloppy. And willpower is kind of like this. The more willpower we assign to a certain task, as later as the day carries on, our willpower isn't as strong anymore. And that means the more willpower we assign to a task, it means that we're also assigning more thinking power to that task as well. And it results in the same sort of process, that by the time we reach the end of the day, our thinking power, we're not as focused, we're a little bit distracted, and we might even be a little bit agitated. And I suppose anyone can really relate to that from a hard day's work. You've worked a hard day initially, you're flying through the work, and as the day kind of carries on, then you kind of start making maybe stupid mistakes, or you're just wanting to get the work over with. And in trading, it could be as simple as you just want to find the trade of the day. What is the trade that I'm going to take today? And so what we need to realize is that this could actually be directly linked to overtrading, because spending too much precious willpower on watching tick by tick is very, very dangerous. And it's something I've seen a lot of traders do, is they kind of break into full-time trading. And the initial, they get their funded account, or maybe they've had some sort of side income now where they can start focusing on trading, whatever it may be, more kind of basing their income and full-time income off their trading results. I've noticed that more people are like, great, I can spend more time at the charts. And then they start performing worse than they ever have before. And, although this could be linked to this kind of need for the money, because now you're basing your day-to-day living off how you perform the charts, that's extra pressure. But a lot of the time, spending too much time on the charts is using up a lot of mental capital that is very precious and takes a long time to recharge. We've all experienced this through burnout. It's pretty similar. Because, especially if you're a day trader, you're basically waking up and deciding to go to war every day from a psychological point of view. So we need to realize that, willpower is extremely, extremely precious. And, when we spend too much time assigning willpower to just watching tick by tick and watching movement on the chart, that doesn't really mean anything, but we feel like we're going to miss out on the trading setup. Excuse me, our willpower declines, and so does our thinking power. And if our thinking power is going to decline, that means the decisions we make are probably not going to be up there with how well they could be, when it comes to actually trading to our highest potential. And then what happens is our default mode turns on. So when you're working in that flow state, you kind of feel like a superpower. You feel all the emotions, you feel confident, you're aware of what's going on, you're aware of where we are positioned in the month, week, whatever it may be on the charts. And you're working within that flow state. Okay, but when you're consciously aware of what you're thinking. But when we fall back into that default mode and our mental capital starts to decline bit by bit as the day carries out, we fall straight back into our negative habits, this kind of impulsive behavior of taking stupid trades that don't have any real statistical edge. And that's what's called our default mode. And if you don't understand even yet what I'm talking about, in the most simplest form, you're tired, you've been looking at the charts all day, and now you're making decisions based off how tired you are. or sorry, you're making decisions, and they're worse, get worse and worse because you're getting more tired and tired, and therefore you just can't perform at your highest potential. That's it in its simplest form. But really, when it comes to willpower, you've no more willpower to assign to following your plan. You've no more discipline to follow your plan. And if you've no more willpower, you've no more thinking power to actually think clearly and see with clarity what is in front of you. And if you don't have the thinking power, if you don't have the willpower, you're going to fall straight back into your default mode, where you basically fall back into these negative habits that you were never really consciously aware of. And this just causes us to seek higher risk opportunities. So more examples of how to prevent overtrading. Well, I suppose actually before we jump into that, we should talk just briefly about what to do here in this case. Actually this will fall back into this. We can reference back. Okay, so more examples of how to prevent overtrading. Pick a desired time range to trade. If you're a day trader, in my opinion, there is no reason to be sitting at that chart for 8 hours a day. A lot of you are reaching this funded account to get out of your 9 to 5, and then you're giving yourself another 9 to 5 job. You do not get paid for how long you sit at the charts, and you do not get paid by how much you trade or how much you work or how much you backtest. You get paid for how well you perform when you do work. That does not matter how long it is. It could be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you're in a trade and you're done for the day. But it's those 10 to 20 minutes, your performance within those 10 to 20 minutes, that decide how much you get paid that day, not how long you sit at the charts. And although some of you may have this kind of false reality in your head that full-time trading is sitting at the charts all day, you see in the movies and all of this, but that's not the reality. We want to do it less, and we want to do it bigger and better than everyone else. And we want to really focus on the ideal setup, the ideal pairs that we trade best. And we want to find out what are those ideal setups that we're best able to trade us or trade, and then assign different risk models to them depending on their failure rate and success rate when it comes to a probability point of view, which we can talk in different webinars as well. So you want to pick a desired time range to trade, and this will stop you from falling back into this default mode, because you're not going to be spending hours and hours and hours watching tick by tick, using up different mental, precious mental capital, on just worthless shit on the chart that's just moving up and up, that in your conscious mind you believe holds weight, but it doesn't. The only thing that holds weight is when you have a valid setup there from a statistical edge. And we all do it. We all sit in the chart every now and then. We're trying to make sense of what is happening. But you have to realize that you're using up precious mental capital. And when the time comes to pull the trigger, you're already exhausted your resources. So be very careful of where you're assigning your mental capital. And if you can, keep 1 to 2, keep basically the best decisions that you want to make, or the most important decisions you want to make on a day-to-day basis. Try to make them initially the first thing in the morning. I know a lot of us can't really do it with 9 to 5 and things like that, but if you are able to trade in the morning, in my opinion, from a psychological point of view, you do have a psychological advantage. And make sure that you assign those really 1 to 2 good trading decisions that you want to make for the first thing in the morning. Okay, so when we're still sharp, our willpower is recharged, thinking power is recharged, etc., etc. You've slept well, you've done all the basics right. So the next thing is you want to learn to balance trading and life. Such a simple concept, but many just fall into this trap of just looking at the charts for hours and hours and hours. And, really, you have to get a life, you have to get a hobby, you have to, be able to sweat it out in the gym and find that balance with your friends. And I think from a psychological point of view, I find when I've worked with people who have reached that consistency level and are making, pretty good money. One thing I find from a psychological point of view that they face is they tend to bring that negative, those negative feelings they have in the trading day back home. And then it starts affecting their partners and their relationship with their partners and their family, etc. So it's very, very important that you do work on your mental game and you're constantly working on mindfulness and do have balance in life, because it's a stressful game. Like I said, you wake up every day and decide to go to war. So you need to make sure that you're working on your mindfulness and you're working on your mental game. So next thing you can do is limit the number of trades you take. And if you limit the number of trades you take on a day-to-day basis, that means you're going to limit the amount of really hard decisions you have to make, meaning that we're assigning our willpower to the task when it really matters. And you know, another part of overtrading is getting more capital. Now, this is not an excuse for those who have no discipline in following their plan or haven't really set those initial basics or foundations. But for those who have and are now more over trading because they're not satisfied with, you know, maybe their 20, 30 euro they made on a 1,000 euro account. Your next stage now is if you've actually shown that you're able to reach consistency, is to get more capital. And you'll find that a lot of those psychological issues will solve themselves. And next is, like I said at the start of this webinar, understand this is a performance field. You do not get paid for how many hours you work. You get paid for how you perform when you do work. There is a huge difference here. So, you know, please understand the difference, okay? Let's see what we have. I think we're coming to the end here now, but, you know, become clear about what you're looking for. You know, what should you do more of and what should you do less of? It's a simple question, but many of us never really think about it. It's like business. A lot of us are, you know, we think we're doing the correct things behind the scenes that is going to get us X amount, when in reality, it's not really, when you weigh it out compared to the other things you could be doing, it's not really holding as much weight. And I think that falls into the basic idea of the 80-20 rule. You know, what could you do now that if you did nothing else, you could still reach, you know, your ideal peak performance or your goals or whatever it may be. So you need goals, and you need to make sure that your goals are the correct goals. And then once you're able to actually build a framework of what those goals are and what you should be assigning your focus to, you have to realize that your goals then are only as good as the systems you put in place to make those goals a reality. So, you know, there's a process to everything. And I think developing clarity is so important. A lot of people have heard me say that over and over again. You have to have clarity in your trading. You have to have clarity in what you're looking for. It can be as simple as asking yourself, what should I do more of and what should I do less of? So for example, if you're trading at the moment and you feel like you don't really have confidence in what you're doing, well, maybe you should be out there collecting more statistics. Maybe you should be out there actually building up chart experience for yourself and, you know, practicing the live execution and getting comfortable with the uncertainty of the markets, but also building as much certainty in those areas where you think that there is nothing but uncertainty. What I mean by that is that if you have a specific pattern and let's just take any pattern, an engulfing pattern, for example. I'm using this just for the basic of what I'm talking about here. You know, if you're trading even a simple pattern like that, there's no reason why you shouldn't understand the success rate and failure rate of that pattern, for example, moving 1 times its range, how long it would take to move 1 times its range, and what is the, you know, what is the success and failure rate of that? Or what's the probability of it moving 2 times its range, 3 times its range? All of these different statistics. That is how we start trading with a mindset that thinks with probabilities. Because how can we start trading with a mindset that uses probabilities if you don't understand the numbers in the first place? You know, there's work to this game. You can't just come in and look at a YouTube video, watch this psychological webinar, and then go out tomorrow and start making real money, or more so, even get capital off someone else. You know, there's more to this game. You need to understand and give reason for everything you're doing. From a psychological point of view, technical point of view, fundamental point of view. There's work to this game. So what you should do more of, you know, let me actually just get this up here. I think I have some slides about this, which might actually come in handy here. And I can just give you a few examples. Let me see here. Maybe I don't. Okay, but okay, so some of the things anyway, right? So what should you be doing more of? Like I said, backtesting, working on your statistics, prepping more and planning more, putting a lot more work into the actual planning of your trades. If you're arriving to the desk every morning and saying, right, what are we going to trade today? You're not treating this business seriously. And that's what it is. It's a business. And a lot of the time, if you're finding that you can't knock yourself out of this negative, pattern of behavior, a lot of the time it's because the losses haven't cut deep enough yet for your brain to force yourself out of this negative behavior. And I'm not saying you go out and you, you start blowing an account or anything like this, but there's a reality to this game that the lessons that we learn in this game, a lot of the time we have to experience them first. And I actually posted a reel about this today, that you have to experience the the emotions taking over to realize that how important the psychological game was in the first place. You have to realize that how important, you may go through the blown accounts, you may have blown a few accounts. Well, that's still, you experience that, and that's what helped you realize how important risk management was. You may have written out your first trading plan, and then you're still not seeing consistency. Well, maybe that was the point where you realized that, hey, maybe I need to gather statistics behind what I'm doing, or maybe I need to add in some sort of fundamental approach and develop a bias, basing it off the divergence of a weaker economy against a stronger economy. That's the thing in trading, and that's why so many people give up so quickly, because they don't realize that to learn these lessons, we have to experience them first. And that's the same with overtrading and all of these different things. And to bring it back to overtrading, because I know we went off topic here, but it's all still relevant. Overtrading is just another negative pattern of behavior that has the same behavioral process, like everything. It doesn't matter if what you're doing is you're consistently making the same mistakes, you're consistently taking poor decisions. If it's self-sabotage, for example, large majority of people don't realize that self-sabotage, much like emotions, is just addressing something. It's another signal. Self-sabotage usually is a signal that your mindset is outdated. And we will be doing a webinar on that, where you basically have to go through 3 layers of behavioral change. It comes down to changing your outcomes, even changing your identity, and really looking deep into the process that you take on a day-to-day basis. But it's the same with emotions. Then emotions are just a signal that you haven't solved a problem, or that there's a problem that you have not yet addressed. You're not feeling pissed off at yourself, that you're consistently making the same decisions. It's deeper. It's a lot deeper than that. It's deep down that you're making these decisions. But if you are willing to actually look at the emotion, why am I getting frustrated here? What am I angry at? Okay, I'm angry that I took a poor decision. I keep feeling this emotion. I keep making poor decisions, and you're getting all emotional about it. Well, that's the point where you need to say, wait, this is happening over and over again. The amazing thing about emotions is it's providing you the blueprint of where you need to address your focus to. People see them as a negative thing. If you keep making poor decisions, you're getting angry about that. That's a blueprint for where you need to assign your focus. Okay, why am I making poor decisions? Is it from a psychological problem, or is it a technical problem? So first of all, we go to the technical problems. Right, if I have my 7 pillars, entry, exit, risk management, trade management, whatever it may be, you want to look at those pillars. You want to say, right, do I have full belief in what I'm doing? Am I able to explain why I'm doing a certain thing over this? Do I need to add in some sort of fundamental bias here? Would that kind of start bringing the statistical side of things a little bit cleaner together? And from there, then we can move over to the psychological problem if you really do feel like you've clarity from your, technical side of things. And like I said, that usually involves mapping out the behavior like this. Finding out what the initial feeling was, what the behavior is, what the belief is after that, and then the initial thought after the action takes place. So once again, the feeling of overtrading. I wanted to take a trade. The behavior that happened after that was scrolling blindlessly through the charts. That's the signal that now you're looking for movement rather than opportunity that has statistical edge. After that, you're blindly scrolling through the chart, and you fully now convince yourself, because you've looked so hard at the chart, that you've found an ideal setup. All logical, critical thinking, problem solving, discipline, willpower, it all goes out the door. Because the initial thought, the initial feeling of I want to take a trade was so strong that it overcome your actual, discipline to follow the plan in the first place. It just all goes out the door. And from there, then you make you overtrade, and you consistently keep making poor decisions, and you realize that you shouldn't have taken the trade. You should have stopped at your initial loss. And then you get pissed off at yourself, which causes more emotional tilt. So you have to map out your process. You have to map out what is the feeling, what is the behavior. And like I said before, if you're struggling to find that trigger, the easiest way to find this, or the trigger itself, is maybe not a thought, but I find that a lot of people find this a lot easier to look at the specific action you do. And if these actions can be so simple, but they're precious information for you deflecting from that negative behavior. Like I said, in this case, it's scrolling through the charts. That's just one example. You trying to force a setup, or not being sure of a setup, maybe making a poor decision, could be something as simple as you coming closer to the chart and looking in detail. When I'm really studying it and saying, not too sure. Or even to deflect from that behavior, you could have a flow charts in place where you have to initially go through this step-by-step process, a checklist, much like the military do to make decisions. Keep them in order, make sure they're not forgetting things, prepped all the time, using some sort of checklist to say that, right, I can, even use some sort of grading process for my setups. If I can't get at least 6 confluences out of 10, I'm not going to take the trade. Anything below 7 confluences, I'll risk this much. Anything above 8 confluences, I'll risk this much. If I get 10 confluences, I'll be able to reach this much, and base it all off, a statistical side of things. You need to collect data on that. You can't just base these decisions off a hunch and how you feel. You can't say that, oh, well, this engulfing pattern seemed to work the last few days, I'll assign more risk to here. No, you need to go and do the work, and you actually need to find the statistical edge behind this. So like I said, what should you do more of? What should you do less of? People who can focus I have to move this here. People who can focus get things done. People who can prioritize get the right things done. And that's the aim of the game here. We want to be doing the right things, that really maximize our results. So we want to really maximize the amount of output we're getting for the input we're putting in. And that's why I say back here as well, that understand this is a performance field. You do not get paid for how many hours you work. You do not get paid for how many hours you sit at the chart on the weekend and do analysis and draw lines in the chart, or how many hours you sit there watching each tick by tick. You don't get paid for that. You get paid for how well you perform when you do work. That doesn't matter if it's an hour, 2 hours, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, you're in and out of a scalp in a few minutes. It doesn't matter. It's about how you perform when you do work, what matters, what gets you paid at the end of the day. So I think we're going to finish this webinar here. I know a lot of people kind of came in there at the last few minutes and initially kind of probably didn't get a deep breakdown of what we were talking about here, of deflecting from that negative pattern of behavior. But this will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can watch it and go over it again. If you have any questions, you can send them into the chat. I hope you all enjoyed the first webinar. We're going to try and do 1 or 2 of these a week, talking everything about performance, finding different psychological problems and finding the triggers to them and mapping out the process and understanding why we do certain things. It's a lot more important than people think, but that's no excuse. We can't blame psychological problems for a lack of understanding of what we're actually doing. If you don't understand the basic fundamentals, if you don't understand the statistics behind your approach, is it really a psychological problem? That's where things get a little bit kind of thrown around the place, and people will tend to blame that they have a psychological problem for really their lack of education or understanding of a subject. For example, this is a common example, and we'll kind of finish on this. So if you have any questions, you can send them into the chat at the moment. But a lot of the times we see people, this is a prime example. A lot of the time we see people saying that they have, that they suffer with patience. And the thing is, I think it's a lot deeper than that. And I think people are very quick to jump to say that, oh, I suffer from patience, I suffer from greed, I suffer from X, Y, and Z, and whatever kind of other bullshit they can convince themselves of that kind of eases that pain. Really, is it a lack of patience that made you pull the trigger on a poor setup, or was it a lack of clarity of what you were actually looking for? Was it patience that made you exit the trade early, or did you just not know what action you needed to take next? Like, was it patience that made you, or a lack of patience that made you run to the charts in the morning and just enter on the first bit of movement you saw? No, it was a lack of clarity. You have no process, you have no consistent process, and therefore your results will not be consistent. It's like your emotions. If you're always basing decisions off how you feel, and you don't feel the same as you did today, as you did yesterday and the day before, your emotions will also have that inconsistency. And that's why our process needs to be the same over and over and over again, and that has been proven to work over historical period. And we're looking not just for to reach consistency in our trading in terms of results, but we're looking for consistency in our process. Like, what are we doing? Developing templates around what we're doing. If you're, I know we said we finish here, but this is important, because even if you're trading from a price action point of view, we see all the time people are saying, well, you can't trade without using fundamentals. You can't trade without using price action. You can't trade with SNC. Whatever it is, you still need to have clarity behind what you're looking for and be able to explain to me. If I asked you, well, why are you entering this way over another way? Pop that straight up in an Excel sheet and show me the numbers. They're hardcore decisions. You've proved to yourself why you're doing something. And if you've proved to yourself why you're doing something, you're going to be able to trade at that level of confidence that others aren't going to be able to. And that's who you're competing against. You're competing against people that have proven why they're doing certain things. That allows them to jump into that flow state every single day because they know the odds of the game. If you don't know the odds of the game, you shouldn't be playing the game. And it's as simple as that. Let me just have a look at some of the questions coming in here. What do you think about taking a step back to put in place certain things and trade next that step back? Sorry, I'm not too sure exactly what you mean. If you can kind of maybe explain it a little bit differently. Yes, brilliant. I love this. After listening and reading your content of many other traders, there's no question I can ask that will make me a better trader. I believe we all know what needs to be done, what process we need to go over, but we're too lazy and seek easier ways of reaching that goal. That's exactly it. And it's like this self-sabotaging behavior. That is brilliantly put, because this is the how powerful the mind can be. Sometimes, okay, so I've seen people who will self-sabotage themselves over and over and over and over again, and they just can't put their finger on it. They're saying, I'm putting in all this work. I've got my funded account. I blew it up again, or I started reaching consistency and then I fell back into that emotional tilt and started making poor decisions again. And the interesting thing about this is that it is an act of self-sabotage. And on a subconscious level, these individuals are doing this because it gives them a false illusion of control. Because if they're self-sabotaging themselves from a subconscious point of view, they are actually able to predict the future that they will fail. And that gives them a false illusion of control. And this is usually found in people that usually like to control their environment or control the situation around them. I don't personally suffer with this myself, but I would say that I would like to, especially in business and stuff, kind of control what is happening. I'd like to know what's happening, behind the scenes of my businesses and stuff. I'm quite intimate with the roles and things like that. It's very common for people who like to control their environments that they actually self-sabotage themselves, because it gives them a false illusion of control by being able to predict the future. And they do that on a subconscious level. And that's why it can be so hard sometimes to pinpoint those problems. Let me just have a look here at the other questions. Oh, so taking a step. Yes. Okay. So basically, what do I think about you taking a step back to reflect on what type of trader I am, the things I do in my trading, and analyze my trading before taking more trades in the future. Well, here's the thing. If you are aware of what you've been doing and kind of what mistakes you've been doing, and you can kind of take a step back and start mapping out that behavior. But a lot of the time, people aren't even aware of what they're doing. So you need to actually sit at your desk and really take the trades and continue executing like you are, and write down these thoughts that are taking place, the behaviors that you're doing. So it involves a lot of self-awareness. So it could be as simple as, when I enter a trade, I find that my leg immediately starts shaking, or my palms start sweating, or my shoulders start tensing. Usually this is a sign of, nervousness, anxiety, you're unsettled, etc., etc. And when we start kind of mapping out what's happening, the pattern of behavior, I enter the trade, this happened, or I was in the middle of a trade, I wanted to exit, I did this. We're mapping out the behavior. It could sound so stupid, it could sound so childish, but we need to understand the pattern that is taking place to be able to do exactly what I've shared in this webinar, which is find a way of deflecting away from that negative behavior. Okay, we need to figure out the pattern, no matter how basic it is, no matter how stupid it sounds, to write down, I took a trade, I felt like this was the outcome after I felt like this, and etc., etc. Mapping out a very, very simple process. And when you do this over about 2 weeks, you're going to have basically a Bible. It could be as simple as, it could be as simple as just getting a journal. Okay, I'm not too, you can't actually see this, but it could be as simple as just getting a simple journal, writing down you're in your trade, and either write it down after if you don't have enough time to focus on the trade itself. It could be as simple as taking a trade and then getting your phone and actually doing a voice memo or a recording of yourself. Okay, this is what I did, this is how I felt, this is the action that happened. Documenting that process for the next 2 weeks, and then putting in different finding the trigger and then deflecting from that negative behavior. And if you find that you can't solve the problem in about 2 weeks, and Jared Tendler says this himself, if you can't find the problem within 2 weeks, it's probably a much more deeper psychological problem, some sort of scar tissue there, that you're probably traumatized, maybe from multiple blown accounts and things like that. And that's a much more deeper subject. Okay, so let me just see some of the questions here. So when I'm faced with a deadline to earn certain amount of money, that's when I'm messing things up, like 2-3 days left in funding, phase 1 challenges. Before that, I'm doing good. I know I need to work more and be consistent, but something that I'm missing, what's your take on it? Okay, well, here's the thing about funding challenges, because that's directly linked to the question is directly linked to funding challenges there. We all know that funding challenges have these time limits to play with our emotions and do exactly what the problem that you're facing now. It's designed to do exactly that. But really now, at this rate, I think that there are so many different options out there with prop firms that you no longer even need to take on any sort of funding challenge that has a time limit on it. Definitive funding is one that I think is absolutely brilliant. Like I've said countless of times before, the students in my mentorship program, I will not recommend one single prop firm to them, because I know that's a route they're going to take to get their initial funding. I will not recommend any prop firm to them until I take it myself. And I've tested definitive funding, and they have no time limits. 7.5%, I think the goal is the initial target. Their customer service is great, all of that, but I'm just using that as an example. There are plenty of different firms that have come out that have no time limits. And if you want to work with a firm that has a time limit because it gives you some sort of status, well, I think you're putting more psychological friction on yourself than you have to. But that's what makes things difficult, that you've 2-3 days left, and this is the thing. It's a performance field. You're not you're trading very aggressively in a prop firm challenge that has a time limit. And the way you trade when you get that funded account is going to be completely different to how you traded during the period of carrying out that challenge. So if you can, my answer to that is really, play the odds of the game, and the odds are stacked in your favor when you're trading in an environment that allows you to truly perform, instead of adding on this unnecessary psychological friction that comes with having, a time limit. Go and use different prop firms, that are well known in the space that have no time limit. That's what I would say. Stack the odds in your favor. If you don't know the odds of the game, you don't know, you shouldn't be playing the game. Let's have a look at some more questions that are coming in. I just now start to understand why a mentor was never a big fan of is a good thing. And I came to I just now start to understand why a mentor is a good thing. And I came to a realization by self-analyzing my own behavior. And I found out how hard it is to self-analyze and be 100% true to oneself. Having someone else criticize your bad habits and things you do is so much easier. Exactly. And if people don't realize that the quickest way, or the only way to buy time, is to buy people's mistake. And although the initial investment of actually investing into mentors can be quite intimidating, and especially in the social media space nowadays, it can be, you're not too sure what you're really going to get out of it. You're not too sure if the individual is legit, etc., etc. And I can speak from experience myself. I invested absolutely thousands. I mean, thousands into my education. When I first got my initial mentor, who was, had a lot of credibility behind him, and I took a very, very large loan out of the bank, and I would not recommend that at all. Please do not do that ever. But that's what I knew, that I had to get someone's expertise to help me in this game. I knew that I couldn't be honest enough to myself in a quick enough time period, to get where I need to be and be able to spot these psychological problems. And you can ask your mentor, like, what are three different questions? Once again, the one thing, Gary Keller, he says, ask a stupid question, get a fucking stupid answer. Ask a powerful question, get possibly a life-changing answer. So start asking questions, not that just give you yes or no answers. Start asking questions that actually give you a blueprint to success. Pick their mind. What are they doing? Ask your mentor, what are 3 skills that you have that I need to get where you are? What's one question? Ask your mentor this. What's one question you wish you asked your mentor sooner? What are behavioral patterns that you see in myself that keep coming up that could cause me to never make it in this game, or that are detrimental to my success? Be as specific as possible, but be smart. Get your money's worth. If you're going to pay for someone to actually help you, and really get to know you on an intimate level, and actually help you find trading success, make sure you're getting your money's worth by asking the right questions. Don't just ask a question that's a yes or no answer. You can ask Google that. Fucking ask ChatGPT that if you want to. So pick their brain, understand what they're thinking, understand what makes them who they are. And I think that's what's most important. That's why it's important to have a mentor. You're literally buying the blueprints to their success. I trade my strategy in past phases in the challenges. Then I get significant gain on phase 2. I end up self-destructing. Could be falling back into that self-sabotaging behavior, where it's just a signal that your current mindset is outdated. Have you actually worked on your identity enough to be one who can trade a 6-7 figure account? Like, have you set those psychological foundations? When you're self-sabotaging yourself, just like emotion, it is a signal that there is something there that you have not yet addressed. There is a problem that you've not yet addressed. And this could be from a psychological point of view, or a lack of clarity in what you're actually looking for from a technical point of view. So you need to find out, and only you will know this through looking at, okay, this is why I do certain things. This is my trading plan. This is why I do certain things. I can back up all of this here. If you can't back it up, well, there's a problem that you need to address. You can even identify these problems that if you're in, and this is why we need to map out our patterns behavior. If you're in a trade, you enter a trade, and you all of a sudden then start thinking, like, it could be just an initial thought, maybe I should move my stops to break even right now. Or, I think I'm going to exit this trade, and just be finished for it. If you're thinking those thoughts, they're all decisions that are based off feelings. There's a lack of clarity in what you're doing, so follow the emotion, follow the self-sabotaging behavior, figure it out, map the behavior out, and then find a trigger and deflect from it, or at least upgrade your software. Just like a computer would upgrade itself to continue running properly. It's like you wouldn't wake up tomorrow and throw shit in your car's fuel tank and expect it to run properly still. But yet we keep filling our brain with the wrong things that, we need, we keep filling our brain with this shit that we don't need to perform at our highest level. Okay. So, find the pattern of behavior, fix your identity, go through the 3 layers of behavioral change the outcome, change your identity, change your thought process. And that's kind of how we get closer and closer. It's a long process. It really does involve mapping it out, finding the trigger, deflecting, and creating a new roadmap. But it's worth it. It's one that's necessary. It's not pretty, but it's necessary. Thanks a lot. Much needed clarity. I got the system back to a good idea, but what's difficult is the implementation, mostly the trade management part after the execution, the holding period. How did you deal with it? Well, this obviously depends on what style of trader you are. If you're just some sort of price action scalper, there's a lot of intuition involved. And that's why I think a lot of people are actually causing the problems they're facing are actually self-inflicting without them even realizing. And I say a large majority here in this group, in this Zoom call at the moment, are trading smart money concepts. Now, everyone knows that, how I kind of feel about the whole kind of founder ICT, but a lot of people make money off smart money concepts. But here's where the problem comes into play, that it involves a lot of intuition. Because when a strategy has so many shapes, sizes, and variants in an environment that is run based off uncertainty, the level of intuition you need to really perform at your max level, like your peak performance, is years and years of experience. And this is why so many people come into this game and they originally find smart money concept and they say to themselves, wow, this provides so much clarity. I now see why the market is doing a certain thing. I can see why I'm getting a sniper entry here. But usually that's really in hindsight. When it comes to the execution part, they see an order block, they see whatever it may be, and they're saying to themselves, oh, well, why did that order block work and the other one didn't? Because there's a level of intuition that takes place. And when you're just basing it off price action alone, it's not going to work. You might get short-term success, but there needs to be some sort of other factor in there. That could be down from a statistical point of view, a volume point of view based off time, fundamental view, but you need something there that's going to complement what you're doing while you're drawing lines on the chart, like the logic behind how much weight people put into trading just price action alone. And, I'm a statistical price action trader myself at heart. But I find it funny when you say to someone, would you trade based off a moving average crossover? And they start laughing and they say, no, like I wouldn't do that. But yes, the moving average is just showing you the average movement over the last X amount of candles. It's just simplifying the information in front of you. You're believing or expecting that the price action is holding more weight than it actually does. And that's where we fall into problems, because now you're falling into an expectations trap. So, what we're doing, you have to realize we're all doing the same thing here. So if you're consistently making the same problems, you're falling into the hole of those consistent losers. And you need to write down what a 6-7 figure trader does, their daily habits, thoughts, and actions. And you need to start doing what they do. And if you don't know what they do and what actions they take and how they think and how they actually manage themselves in the trade, you can work backwards and you can start writing down what would be the best way to fuck up? What would be the best way to blow your account tomorrow? Or what would be the best way to actually never reach trading success? And then you now have a blueprint and you just work off that by doing the opposite. Sometimes you just need to work backwards to find out what you're looking for. So listen, this webinar here has gone off and we've gone off on so many other different subjects here. Sorry, one more question here and then I'll answer. Do you still mess things up, Trey? Sorry, here, 1 second. Do you still mess things up, trade sometimes against your trade plan, and then later on realize you weren't in the right mindset in the first place? Yeah, definitely. Um, I wouldn't say that it happens on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, of course it happens from time to time. There was definitely a month last year where I, definitely experienced probably a bit more emotional tilt than I usually did. And that was due to a very, very close family member of mine who passed away. And I shouldn't have been trading during those periods, but yet I did. Now we came out okay at the end, but I shouldn't be trading during that time. And this is the thing, you have to realize that you will fuck up along the way. And that's why risk management is so crucial. And if you believe that you will never make a mistake or that you will never fuck up, you're believing that perfectionism exists in this game. And if you believe perfectionism exists in this game, you're putting unnecessary pressure on yourself to accept the loss in the first place. And if you can't accept the loss, you're never going to be able to fall into that level of peak performance because you're not accepting the consequences of that. This is a probabilities game. And even sometimes you can perform at your highest level and lose. And that's why you need to be so process driven. But last question here. Major issues I've noticed from people starting to trade is emotional attachment to money, overvaluing money, and therefore scared of pulling the trigger, even if the strategy is proven to work, for example. That has been my big issue. So I've noticed people starting to trade emotional attachment to money. Yes, okay. So the initial emotional attachment to money. So I've heard so many things about this where people, I actually saw on Twitter today, someone said, if you want to get rid of the emotional attachment to money, put like 200 or 1,000 euro into your trading account and purposely lose. Now I know what they were trying to do, but that's absolutely ridiculous. We don't need to be fucking stupid here, okay? When it comes to an emotional attachment to money, I think actually it's deeper. It comes down to this thing that I call an expectations trap. So a lot of people come into the game and they have this initial expectation, and we've all done it, that we're going to make a lot of money. And this kind of initial expectation, even that when you take a trade, you believe that this is the trade that's going to be a winner, or you believe that this is the trade that's going to pass your funding challenge, whatever it may be. And the thing is, when we assign this expectation and we don't get what we want, this is where we experience the emotional tilt. Like you're talking, you get very emotional attachment to money. You're overvaluing the money, almost scared to pull the trigger. There's two things there that's happening. I'll explain the expectations trap, and then I'll explain the fear. But the expectations trap, like I was saying, is just like a toddler. Think back to something where you were younger and your parents said to you, I promised to get you that toy car that you wanted from the toy store. You get all excited. You feel like you expect that toy from them now, and then you don't, for whatever reason. You end up not getting what you want. And what happens? You throw a massive tantrum because what you expected to get never happened. Take that same understanding and put it to trading. You expect this trade to be a winner. You expect this trade to reach X price level. You expect this trade to do X, and you don't get what you want. It's the exact same emotion that's taking place. So we need to fall into this focus, or into this process of working in harmony with our emotions, where we're accepting the risk. And this means that, if you're fearing to pull the trigger and you're overvaluing money, it could be because you haven't found your ideal risk sweet spot. So just like I was explaining earlier on about our prefrontal cortex, and we need the ideal arousal and stress to reach our peak performance. So that means we need an almost perfect balance of neurochemicals to perform at our highest level. It's very similar when it comes to actually risk with our sweet spot. So a trader's characteristics who risks too much is someone who hesitates to take a trade. They're scared of pulling the trigger, for example, here. Or it could be as simple as they move their stops to break even too quickly or exit the trade, etc. A trader who risks too little, on the other hand, doesn't care about the consequences. They have that kind of thought process of, oh, I placed the trade today, it was a winner, I can risk again, it's free money. Or it could be something as simple as, let me think of another example here. Or that, oh, this trade looks like it's going to move. This could be an ideal setup. I'll pull the trigger. It doesn't really matter. It's low risk. So they're the characteristics of a trader who risks too little. But the trader who risks at the perfect amount, the ideal sweet spot, is someone who is aware of the consequences, and in this case, the consequences are the risk, so the losing of the money, but they're able to accept how much they're willing to lose, but not, they don't care too much to the fact where they can't operate and execute flawlessly. So they're not adding basically too much pressure on the weight of the value of that money itself. And really, it just comes down to acceptance. Really, acceptance of the money. So being able to accept that this is the risk, and sometimes that takes going through a process of maybe a week of trying different risk models. So saying, right, my max ever I'm going to risk is 2%, let's just say, and you're using a hypothesis here, an educated guess. You're going to say, right, the max I'm ever going to risk is 2%. The lowest I think I'm ever going to go is 0.2%. So, or 0.1%, whatever it may be. And what you want to do is, on each trade you're taking, you want to find, or it could take 2-3 months to do, but you want to slowly find, okay, where is that sweet spot? Where is that ideal risk level where I'm able to perform at my highest level? You know, where I'm able to perform at peak performance, where I'm able to execute flawlessly, but I still care about the consequences enough to follow my plan, but I don't care about them too much that I can't accept the consequences, which in this case are the risk itself. So I'm just going to read these last things and then we're going to finish up. My 2 cents on how I managed to somewhat become a better trader than I was. I only focus on how much money will I lose on this trade. I don't even look at the potential profit. Therefore, I also manage risk with how big the position is. By doing that, I know that I deal with a loss much better than before when I focus on profits. Yes, that's a very good strategy. And that's what's most important, finding out what works for us. So listen, in this case, this webinar actually lasted a lot longer than I expected. I am going to head to the gym myself. You didn't really get much trading activity at all this month so far. So, you know, I didn't trade today, didn't trade yesterday, bank holiday, didn't trade Friday. So tomorrow I should be back in the charts for the London session. So basically, everyone have a great evening. I might try to do another one of these on the weekend. We're going to try to get at least 2 of these done a week. And, you know, we may even bring in some sort of technical fundamental breakdown at some point, but, you know, it's going to be more of a performance kind of webinars that we're going to be talking about. This will be uploaded on YouTube. And like I said, you have until July the 7th to join my mentorship program to learn statistical price action approaches, technical points of views, have kind of one-to-one back and forth with me. So if you are interested in that, the link is in the bio, and you have until July the 7th, because I will no longer be mentoring students from a kind of statistical price action point of view, working up with them to kind of, you know, develop clarity around their trading. I'll be much more going into the performance side of things, which is where Conquer originally started. So yeah, like I said, you 7th of July, a few months left to join if you want to do so. And I will be continuously working with those members, even when I stop enrolling members. So if you join now, I'll still be in that chat active in a year or two later as well. So, you know, I'll be active in that as long as I'm actively trading. So, you know, it's a great one-time investment, but we're going to leave it at that. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. You can send me a message on any of my socials. No problem, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And yeah, we will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone, and have a great evening.